Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Partnerships for Climate Smart Commodities webinar. Thank you so much for joining us. I am Nancy McNiff, and I will be your moderator for the event today. Before we get started, just a few reminders about Zoom functions. In general, you will not be able to share audio or video unless we call on you during the Q&A session. If you would like to turn on closed captions, please click the square with CC Live Transcript in it at the bottom of your screen. We are recording the formal part of the presentation in case you experience technical difficulties, and we will post a copy of this presentation on the Partnerships for Climate Smart Commodities webpage as seen on this slide. Please enter your questions using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Following the formal presentation during the Q&A session, we may ask you to raise your hand and we'll take you off mute to ask your question. Please note we cannot answer project-specific questions due to the competitive nature of this funding opportunity. All other questions will be answered during or after the webinar. Now we will start our presentation, and I have the pleasure to welcome our Deputy Undersecretary for the USDA Farm Production and Conservation Mission Area, Ms. Gloria Montano, to begin the presentation with opening remarks.
Thank you, Nancy. Thank you all for joining today and to get some information regarding the Partnership for Climate Smart Commodities funding opportunity. And to be able to learn about the second funding pool and to better understand how you or your entity and organization can be able to participate. We're excited. There's been a lot of broad interest, a lot of questions regarding this announcement since we did it a little over a month ago. And to be able to share with you the conversation you'll be having here today, the funding opportunity required quite a few conversations. It was an RFI feedback that we had in April of 21. Of responses that we received to a call for additional information in late September through November, and various stakeholder conversations to be able to understand how are we thinking about producers, how are we thinking about local communities, how are we thinking about equity, how are we thinking about small producers, beginning farmers, young farmers, as we participate and take on climate smart commodities. So with that, just thank you very much for joining today. You have one of the best experts in the country on how do we move forward on climate smart commodity and how are we thinking about agriculture and climate change in one. So I want to just recognize some individuals that you'll be hear from that have been behind the scenes in developing this. Vidisha Bhattacharya, who is a Senior Advisor for Climate and Conservation at FPAC, Alyssa Charney, Chief of Staff for Natural Resources Conservation Services, and Katina Hansen, who is serving as the Acting Senior Advisor for Climate Smart Commodities, the Acting Senior Advisor for Climate Smart Commodities. So with that, just thank you all. We hope you get a very robust information. This will be posted on the website afterwards as well. So if you miss some notes and want to return to be able to get a very thorough, and we look forward to receiving applications and interest. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Deputy Undersecretary. I'm excited to share with you a short presentation today, kind of focusing in on the second funding pool. If you have tuned in before, you'll see a lot of similar information, but we wanted to have this opportunity for folks to ask questions specifically about the second funding pool. And we're excited to be here. So with that, I will share the presentation. Okay, so we are talking about the Partnerships for Climate Smart Commodities, building markets and investing in America's climate smart farmers, ranchers, and forest owners to strengthen U.S. rural and agricultural communities. And this funding opportunity is available right now on grants.gov. So this funding opportunity grew out of market opportunities that we were seeing. Markets are demonstrating demand for commodities produced using climate smart practices. You may have seen, different types of marketing related to climate or climate friendly, climate smart. So this grew out of that signal, and consumers are increasingly interested in how their products are produced. This opportunity is about leveraging that demand to create new revenue streams for producers. So as the Deputy Undersecretary mentioned, we had a lot of information that fed into this funding opportunity. Most recently in September, we took information from across the public. We had comments from nearly 400 people, groups and individuals, and that spanned from commodity groups to environmental groups to the general public. And so we took that information and we designed and structured this funding opportunity out of those comments. Some of the key principles that resonated, and you'll see within the funding opportunity, it's focused on creating new opportunities and markets for agriculture and forestry. It's focused on partnerships and voluntary and incentive-based opportunities. It's farmer, rancher, and landowner led, so involvement and thought to how this benefits producers from the beginning. It's accessible to small and/or underserved producers, and it's accessible to early adopters, those who have already applied climate smart practices. So up to $1 billion is being made available under this funding opportunity. And through these projects, they will build markets and invest in America's climate smart farmers, ranchers, and forest owners to strengthen US rural and agricultural communities. Today, we're focused in on the second funding pool, and the deadline for that is May 27th of 2022. Those are proposals from 250,000 to just under 5 million and are limited to particularly innovative pilot projects. These projects should place an emphasis on enrollment of small and/or underserved producers and/or monitoring, reporting, and verification activities developed at minority serving institutions. So why have this second funding pool? A key theme we heard in public comments and stakeholder feedback last year is that opportunity needs to be inclusive of all of American agriculture. That includes small and historically underserved producers. We also heard that entities that might be able to help execute projects that provide a greater focus on small and/or historically underserved producers may more successfully participate if we met a few key needs. So one of those was a longer application period to assemble projects. Another was an option for small-sized grants. And finally, a way to ensure that smaller projects aren't compared to significantly larger projects. So that's the second funding pool is designed specifically in response to that feedback. So here's an overview of that second funding pool. Again, project sizes are from 250,000 to just under 5 million. And those proposals are limited to particularly innovative pilot projects with the focus, again, on enrollment of small and/or underserved producers and/or monitoring, reporting, and verification activities at minority serving institutions. Projects are encouraged to include plans for all of the elements required for the first funding pool. However, USDA recognizes that projects of this size may face limitations in the capacity to execute on all elements and will take these limitations into account during project evaluation. Note that meaningful involvement of small and/or historically underserved producers is a requirement of both funding pools. We are taking equity seriously across all of these projects. So partnerships for climate smart commodities, through partnerships for climate smart commodities, USDA will support the production and marketing of climate smart commodities through a set of pilot projects that provide voluntary incentives through partners to producers and landowners, including early adopters, to implement climate smart production practices, activities, and systems on working lands, to measure, quantify, monitor, and verify the carbon and greenhouse gas benefits associated with those practices, and develop markets and promote the resulting climate smart commodities. Proposals must provide a plan to pilot implementation of climate smart ag and/or forestry practices on a large scale, including meaningful involvement of small or historically underserved producers, consistent with the spirit of Justice 40. A quantification, monitoring, reporting, and verification plan, and a plan to develop markets and promote climate smart commodities generated as a result of the project activities. And again, we understand there may be some limitations as we build these smaller projects, so we'll be taking that into account as we evaluate projects. All projects must be tied to the development of markets and promotion of climate smart commodities. That's regardless of which funding pool you're in. For the purposes of this funding opportunity, a climate smart commodity is an ag commodity that is produced using agricultural, farming, ranching, or forestry practices that reduce greenhouse gas emissions or sequester carbon. Markets for climate smart commodities may include companies or processors sourcing climate smart commodities to meet internal targets or other supply chain goals, biofuel or renewable energy markets, companies seeking to sell branded consumer products, or other opportunities that provide a premium or additional revenue for participating producers and landowners. So key in all of this is sufficient incentives to encourage producer participation, as well as generation of verifiable greenhouse gas reductions and carbon sequestration, which are critical to project success and will be considered in the evaluation criteria. As we look at this, you'll see later in the presentation that there are specific criteria that are weighted more heavily related to equity and outreach in the second funding pool. We've already talked a little bit about what a climate smart commodity is, but commodities are very broadly defined for this funding opportunity, and they can range from more traditional crops like corn, soy, peanuts, oilseeds, to fruits and vegetables and livestock, dairy, forage crops, timber and forestry products, or specialty crops, organic crops, and indigenous crops. So highly competitive projects will include agricultural and forestry practices or a combination of practices and/or practice enhancements that provide greenhouse gas benefits and/or carbon sequestration. Again, as we look at this, as folks are building projects for the second funding pool, as you create your project, if you feel like you can further the goals of this partnerships for climate smart commodities, but can't maybe meet one small piece of this, then that can be described within your proposal, and we will take that into consideration as we review proposals. Here's some examples of the types of practices that could be applied under this project. And who's eligible to apply. So for both funding pools, the eligible partners are wide ranging from public or private entities, including farm groups, states, nonprofits, businesses, tribal governments, and higher education institutions. We are seeking entities that are working with multiple producers and landowners applying climate smart practices on farms, ranches, and forest lands. Here's the range of entities that are eligible. And I'll remind folks here, and I'll probably remind you again at the end of the presentation, If you have not already, go into sam.gov and get yourself set up as an entity there, because you'll need that when it comes time to submit your application. So cost sharing or matching. So for this funding opportunity, there is no specific match requirement. We will take it into consideration as we evaluate projects though. And we plan to award these as grant agreements, and we will be providing general oversight of the grant and the reporting requirements, but on the ground technical assistance will need to be provided by the recipient based on how your project is laid out. Except for highly erodible land and wetland compliance determinations, which USDA will conduct. Start dates and performance periods. Projects can be between 1 and 5 years in duration, with up to 2 years of no cost extensions considered on a case-by-case basis. And the anticipated start dates are summer 2022. Okay, so for all of the proposals, our goal is to get an executive summary of the pilot project, a plan to pilot climate smart ag and forestry practices, a measurement, monitoring, and reporting verification plan, and a plan to develop and expand markets for climate smart commodities. Again, if there's a piece of that that can't be fit into the project in the second funding pool, we need an explanation of that, and we'll take that into consideration as we review the proposals. Proposals in the second funding pool are limited to particularly innovative pilot projects. And again, they focus on enrollment of small and/or underserved producers and/or monitoring, reporting, and verification activities at minority serving institutions. We recognize that projects of this size may face those limitations in the capacity to execute on all elements, and we will take it into account during project evaluation. Okay, so the executive summary includes at minimum a high-level description of the project, the issues it's seeking to address, and how the project will contribute to the goals in this funding opportunity. And it includes contact information, list of project partners, list of underserved minority-focused project partners, compelling need for the project, an approach to minimize transaction costs associated with project activities, the geographic focus, an approach to reduce producer barriers to implementing climate smart ag and forestry practices for the purpose of marketing climate smart commodities, and the project management capacity of partners, including a description of existing relationship with and/or prior experience working with producers or landowners, promoting climate smart activities and marketing climate smart commodities. The narrative also includes a plan to pilot climate smart ag and forestry practices, a description of those practices to be deployed, the plan to recruit producers and landowners, including estimated scale of the project, the plan to provide technical assistance, outreach, and training, including who will be conducting these activities, qualifications, and projected timeline. The plan to provide financial assistance for producers and landowners to implement climate smart ag and forestry practices, and the plan to enroll underserved and small producers, including estimated number of underserved and small producers participating and associated dollar amounts anticipated to go directly to producers in the form of technical and financial assistance. As for digesters, in the second funding pool, they may be funded as part of a project to help fund proving out technologies and building infrastructure on the farm. Large digesters with high capital costs should plan to leverage other innovative financing as part of their applications. Small scale digesters that can build off manure management strategies and community digesters where one system serves multiple farms may be included. Funding for the digesters when combined with other sources may not exceed the cost of the digesters. Applications requesting funding for digesters must complete Appendix D and Appendix E of the application. So if you look in the funding opportunity, Appendix D and Appendix E, which includes a feasibility study, are required if you are including digesters in your application. So measurement or quantification, monitoring, reporting, and verification plan. The approach to greenhouse gas benefit quantification, including methodology approach consistent with the section titled Quantification Requirements, an approach to monitoring of practice implementation, including the anticipated number of farms and acres reached through project activities, an approach to reporting and tracking of greenhouse gas benefits, including the anticipated greenhouse gas benefits per farm, per project, per commodity produced, per dollar expended, and the anticipated longevity of greenhouse gas benefits, as well as the approach to verification of greenhouse gas benefits and an agreement to participate in the partnerships network. So just here to stop for a second, as you're looking at this, we are really looking at how do we build out the markets for climate smart commodities. So regardless of which pool you're in, as you design your proposal, you want to make sure that it's clear how you are going to support the development and expansion of climate smart markets. So that gets us to this part, which is really important. The plan to develop and expand markets for climate smart commodities. Any partnerships designed to market resulting climate smart commodities should be reflected here. A plan to track climate smart commodities through the supply chain if appropriate. Estimated economic benefits for participating producers, including market returns, and post-project potential, including anticipated ability to scale project activities, likelihood of long-term viability beyond project period, and ability to inform future USDA actions to encourage climate smart commodities. So considerations for successful projects, and I modified this a little bit for the second funding pool presentation, emphasizing that these second funding pools are limited to particularly innovative pilot projects with a focus on enrollment of small and/or underserved producers and/or monitoring, reporting, and verification activities at minority serving institutions. All projects must be tied to the development of markets and promotion of climate smart commodities. That's very important. And the sufficient incentives to encourage producer participation, as well as generation of verifiable greenhouse gas reductions and carbon sequestration, which are critical to project success and will be considered in the evaluation criteria. Okay, a little bit on quantification requirements. As you apply practices, we have to also be able to quantify. And Comet Planner is available, a USDA tool, and should be applied for the practices that are available within that tool. We also encourage innovative quantification methodologies. And those outcomes of alternative methods should be compared against entity scale methods or Comet Planner as appropriate. We need alternate methodologies to be documented transparently, be based in peer-reviewed literature whenever possible, be replicable by third parties, and be available for other projects to implement. USDA is not prescribing monitoring and verification methodologies and is seeking proposals that include innovative, rigorous, and cost-effective approaches. Innovation and approaches to monitoring and verification will help to facilitate the deployment of climate-smart ag and forestry at scale and provide information critical to adapting quantification models in the future. Proposed monitoring and verification approaches should ensure the integrity of greenhouse gas benefits and resulting climate-smart commodities, while also ensuring that transaction costs are not a barrier to participation. Additional requirements for quantification, monitoring, and verification may be provided at the time of award. Okay, so here is the application checklist. And this is the same whether you're looking at the first or the second funding pool. The application of federal assistance is required. That's the SF 424. The project narrative, which you can look in the funding opportunity for detailed requirements. I've gone over some of them today. The budget information for non-construction programs and SF 424A. The budget narrative, and there's guidance in the funding opportunity for that. If grants.gov lobbying form, support letters, resume for the lead project administrator, negotiated indirect cost rate agreements, if applicable, disclosure of lobbying activities, if applicable, and disclosure of potential conflicts of interest, if applicable. So grant agreements under this funding opportunity will be with a single entity or partner. However, we encourage multiple partners to coordinate on projects. A range of public and private entities are eligible to apply, and funding will be provided through the two funding pools. USDA intends to fund a diverse set of projects and will not discriminate based on the size of the project. As for the partnership network, this is a critical piece of the funding opportunity as well. All those that are awarded will be expected to participate in this partnership network to help share ideas and lessons learned. Topics may include approaches to quantification, measurement, monitoring and verification, options for supply chain traceability, approaches to marketing, and in the second funding pool here, approaches to marketing for underserved producers may be a particularly good topic to discuss. Lessons learned will be documented and shared publicly. So just to go over key dates again, for those that are looking for the first funding pool, that deadline is April 8th of 2022. Those proposals range from 5 million to 100 million. For the second funding pool, which we've been discussing today, the deadline is May 27th of 2022. And those proposals again range from 250,000 to just under 5 million. If you have not taken it already, we highly encourage you to take the grants training that's available on cfo.gov. That link is shown on your screen. Also, you want to view and submit your funding opportunity at grants.gov. If you have not visited there yet and you intend to submit an application, please go there soon. There's also important steps prior to application, which I mentioned earlier. That one of the most important at this point is getting your SAM.gov registration complete. And this can take multiple weeks, and they are in the process of changing their numbering. So you want to get in there and get that started if you haven't already. Okay, I'm just going to go over here some highlights for the second funding pool. The proposals in the second funding pool are limited to particularly innovative pilot projects. And a lot of this will look familiar, but I want to make sure that we all understand. There's a focus on enrollment of small and/or underserved producers and/or monitoring, reporting, and verification activities at minority serving institutions. For the project narrative, proposals in the second funding pool are also encouraged to include plans for all of the elements listed for the first funding pool. However, USDA recognizes that projects of this size may face limitations in the capacity to execute on all elements and will take these limitations into account during project evaluation. Digesters may be funded under the second funding pool, whereas they cannot in the first. They can be used to help fund proving out technologies and building infrastructure on the farm. And there are some of those additional application requirements that apply if you are proposing to fund a digester. The deadline, again, May 27th of 2022, and those applications range from 250,000 to just under 5 million. And finally, with respect to the merit technical criteria, for applications in the second funding pool under 5 million, equity and outreach criteria will be weighted most heavily. Okay, so if you have not already, I highly encourage you to visit our website at www.usda.gov/climate-smart-commodities. We have a lot of information there. We have links to the funding opportunity as well as frequently asked questions, which there were some updates earlier this week that are now posted there. And we also have the recording from our first webinar, which goes from beginning to end of the funding opportunity. And if you haven't watched it, it is worth the hour and 20 minutes that it takes to go through it if you have that time. With that, I will stop here and I will pass it over to Vidisha Bhattacharya, who is going to do our question and answer session.